Hello and welcome to the Knife Magazine YouTube channel. Today I'd like to show you a knife that has a story. Well, it sort of has a story. It has a historical connection anyway, and there might be a story there, but we don't know the full story. And if we did, we might not even believe that it's true. So I really don't know what we have, but we have an interesting knife that has an interesting person associated with it, and you can kind of make up your own story. And you can believe whether or not it's true as well. Now, I tend to remain skeptical of stories associated with knives. Anyone who's been associated with antique knives for any period of time has heard the old adage, buy the knife, not the story. And no truer words could be spoken in knife collecting. Buy the knife, not the story. However, sometimes the stories do turn out to be real, and sometimes they're very interesting. So it's always worth preserving the story, even if we don't know whether or not it's true. So, you may have noticed that in Knife Magazine we tend to focus a lot on antique knives. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is that your editor, me, loves antique knives. I grew up collecting antique knives of all kinds, and I'm really fascinated with them. And the other reason is that no magazine out there really addresses antique knives very much, and I don't think they do a very good job of it when they do. I'll make an exception for La Passion de Couteau. They do an excellent job on French knives when they do it. But here at Knife Magazine we have access often to some really wonderful antique knives, such as antique Bowie knives. And here are two cover stories we've done in recent years on early guardless coffin Bowie knives. These are the genesis of the Bowie knife in America, the very beginning, the most interesting antique Bowie knives of all to me, associated perhaps with James Black to some degree, and perhaps some of them to other makers. So here are a couple of stories we've done recently. I would like to show you another knife, or a couple of knives, that may be related. So here we have an interesting knife. This knife is somewhat similar to a knife like this, which we call a heart coffin Bowie knife. Even though it doesn't have the filework of the heart coffin, it has this symmetric pin pattern and the general shape of the handle and the lack of a guard, which we associate with early antique Bowie knives from the Deep South. Oh, wait, here's another one. Oh, it just happened to have that lying around. This knife was pictured in the Historic Arkansas Museum catalog, A Sure Defense, the Bowie Knife in America, and was exhibited in that exhibit. It belongs to a private collector right now. This knife is still in the family, actually. So, it seems as if this knife that has been recently discovered here in the Knoxville area is perhaps similar to this in terms of style, and perhaps it may have been inspired by a knife like this. Although the knife uses different materials, this is silver mounted, this is nickel silver mounted. This knife has walnut handles, this knife has curly maple handles, and the construction really is different in many ways, although there are some similarities. This knife is missing its nickel silver wrap around the tang, but there's remaining solder here, so we know that it had one at one time. It's also missing some of the studs, which is not unusual. This one's missing studs too. Originally the tang would have been wrapped as the small knife is. So here we have an interesting and genuine early antique American-made Bowie knife. Now, I mentioned earlier that this knife has a story associated with it. What's the story? Well, this knife turned up with a story that it originally belonged to the outlaw Kid Curry. Now, that's very interesting to those of us who live in Knoxville, Tennessee, because Kid Curry, the outlaw, whose real name was Harvey Logan, has a historical association with Knoxville, Tennessee. You can read about Kid Curry's history in Knoxville, Tennessee on probably several different websites and in several books. I know I've seen it before, but right now I'm looking at this write-up here on scruffycity.com, which chronicles Kid Curry's adventures in Knoxville pretty well. And I would like to read a section from this for you. But I encourage you to go visit the scruffycity.com website and read the entire story for yourself. Kid Curry was an outlaw associated with Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch and supposedly a killer of more than 40 men. But he loved alcohol and he loved women, and supposedly he had as many as 85 children by different prostitutes around the country. Among the other members of the Wild Bunch were the Sundance Kid, Butch Cassidy, of course, and the Hole in the Wall gang. Now, on July 3rd of 1901, a robbery of a Great Northern train near Wagner, Montana left a sheriff cold and stiff. Harvey Logan was able to avoid arrest for more than 5 months by heading east all the way to Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm reading again from the Scruffy City website. On December 13th, 1901, as usual, Logan was passing out bills from his most recent heist, this time in an old city saloon. His merrymaking soon went south, though, after he picked a fight with a patron and shot a couple of deputies who tried to break it up. As was his modus operandi, the notorious outlaw made his escape out the back window. Alas, 2 days later, Logan was captured outside town and brought back beaten and bloodied to Scruffy City's jail. It is said that more than 5,000 people, mostly women, visited the handsome outlaw in jail in the months that followed. A couple of years later, after his conviction, Logan, alias Logan, Kid Curry, would escape jail and ride away on the sheriff's horse and never to be seen again. Now, could this knife have been Kid Curry's? Well, possibly. The knife is a lot older than Curry's time in Knoxville. Curry's time in Knoxville is in December of 1901 up into 1903, and the knife dates from the 1830s or 40s, 50s. Hard to say exactly. It's unmarked, but certainly was made by a rather skilled maker. And what about the whiskey jug? Well, this whiskey jug is interesting because it recently turned up here in Knoxville, Tennessee. And the advertising on this 1-gallon whiskey jug is for Dan and Pat's Saloon, Dan DeWine, proprietor, and then the letters aren't visible. It's 124 South Central Street. Dan is, of course, Dan DeWine, and Pat is Patrick Sullivan. And Patrick Sullivan was the owner of the saloon that Kid Curry shot up the deputies in. Now, in the 1980s, Patrick Sullivan's saloon was restored and labeled with its most famous tenant, Patrick Sullivan. There's a historical marker there now, and it's probably one of the most famous bars in all the South. This particular jug dates from before Kid Curry's adventures at Patrick Sullivan's saloon, and at a different location, 124 South Central Street, was down from where the bar that we now know as Patrick Sullivan's Saloon, which is at 100 South Central Street. This whiskey jug probably dates to the 1870s or 1880s or 1890s, whereas Kid Curry's adventures in Knoxville at Patrick Sullivan's Saloon happened in 1901. However, this whiskey jug is associated with Patrick Sullivan's Saloon, the original location. Kid Curry's adventures in Patrick Sullivan's Saloon, the later location, caused him to become arrested and incarcerated here in Knoxville for a couple of years before his escape. And this knife right here, well, was the knife Kid Curry's? It's hard to say. I would say, buy the knife, not the story. But it's an interesting story and we should preserve it nonetheless. Thank you for visiting the Knife Magazine YouTube channel. We hope to have you back soon.